In this lecture, I'll talk about the latest generation of AFF, all Flash FAS platforms, and we'll discuss the tech specs and how the models compare to each other. ONTAP supports multiple varied workloads over a multitude of supported SAN and NAS protocols and has got very flexible advanced features. It's often known as the Swiss Army knife of the NetApp storage product range. When you've got an ONTAP cluster, different models of FAS and AFF controllers can be used. The rule is just that HA pairs must be the same model. So for example, you could have a single cluster which has got a pair of AFF A300s in there and also a pair of FAS 9000s there as well. The AFF models and the FAS models would be HA partners with each other. Hardware components can also be added non-disruptively to the cluster. So at any time you can add disks, you can add disk shelves, you can add additional controllers, and it doesn't disrupt your existing operations. Okay, so let's have a look at the different models of AFF that are available. So I'll go to the NetApp website, and you can see that I'm on the AFF product page here. To get to this page, click on Products and Solutions, and then go down to Flash Storage, and then over to AFF A series. And that will land you on this page here, and you can click on Models and Specs to get down to the listing of the currently available AFF models. So you can see all of the current models here. Now on the page here, we've got some very basic tech specs, and there's also a use case here as well. But really what the use case comes down to is what workload are you going to be running. So pick a model of controller that matches the capacity and performance requirements for that particular workload. And the reason I showed you that first slide about ONTAP being able to support multiple different workloads and saying that you can have different controllers in the same cluster, well, maybe workload A requires a particular capacity and performance, and workload B requires a different capacity and performance. Well, you can run those two different workloads on the same cluster on different models of controller that matches their requirements. Okay, going back to the slides again. All current AFF and FAS models are dual controller, meaning that there's two controllers in the same chassis and they act as an HA pair, high availability pair for each other. The specifications that I'm going to list in this video are per HA pair, meaning whatever number you see, that is double what you would get with a single controller. The number is for the pair of controllers in the same chassis. Wherever I mention capacities, that is the raw capacity of the disks. Additional capacity can be achieved through the use of storage efficiency techniques, which is supported in ONTAP, meaning our deduplication and compression. Now, whenever you're looking at other sources of figures, you need to consider, are they talking per controller or per HA pair, which would be double the number, or per cluster, which would be equivalent to 24 nodes in the cluster. And when we're talking about capacities, is it the raw capacity or is it the effective capacity, meaning they maybe multiply the capacity by 4 or 5 times, because we're saying that's what you would typically get with deduplication and compression. So whenever you are looking at numbers, specs for a storage system, be careful that you are comparing apples with apples. Okay, so let's have a look at the different models. First one is the AFF A200, and this is what it looks like from the front. The AFF A200 is a similar chassis to the FAS 2700. They're both 2U rack units, and they've both got the same CPU and memory in there. That's 2 times 64-bit 12-core, 1.5 gigahertz for the CPU, and for the memory, it's 64 gig of RAM and 8 gig of NVRAM. Again, per controller pair. So one controller would be half that. If we remove the front bezel, you can see that the AFF A220 takes internal disks. So you don't have to use an external disk shelf with the A220. It does also support external disks as well. So if you're just using the internal drives, it fits 24 in there. You can also use external disk shelves as well. The disk shelves that are supported on all AFF models is the same. It's the DS224C and the DS2246 shelves. So as I go through the rest of this video showing you the other models, I'm not going to keep saying that again. It's the same for all the AFFs. It's the same shelves that are supported. The amount of capacity is different for the different models. So how many actual shelves and disks that they support is different. For the A220, it's a maximum of 114 drives and 4,406 terabytes. So about 4 petabytes on the A220 is the maximum raw capacity. The interfaces that you get on the A220, so the onboard parts that are on there, there is 8 UTA2 parts. A UTA2 part can be configured as either Ethernet or as fiber channel. It's an SFP plus port, so you need to put the correct transceiver in there, either a fiber channel transceiver or an Ethernet transceiver. And in software, you also specify whether you want it to run as Ethernet or as fiber channel. For Ethernet, it can run up to 10 gigabits per second, and for fiber channel, it's 16 gigabits per second. So you've got those 8 UTA ports. There's also 4 10 gigabit Ethernet SFP plus ports, 4 12 gigabit mini SAS HD ports, and the A220 does not have any expansion slots, so it's fixed with those onboard ports. Another thing to tell you here is that all the current AFF models support 24 nodes. If you're only running NAS protocols, if you're running SAN protocols or SAN plus NAS, it's up to 12 nodes. So that's just, again, I won't say this for every single model. It's the same for all the different models. Okay, let's have a look at the actual back of the controller now so you can see where those different ports are. So this is the A220. You can see there's 2 controllers in the chassis there. We've got the controller on the left and the controller on the right, which are both identical. The controllers have got 2 SAS ports on the left here. Then we've got 2 Ethernet 10 gig SFP plus. Then there is the 4 UTA2 ports, which can be used as either fiber channel or 10 gigabit Ethernet. That does have fiber channel over Ethernet support as well. Moving along, we have got the console port, which can be used for management when you plug a console cable directly into it. And we've also got the Ethernet management port, which can be used to manage the system remotely. Okay, so that is the A220. Let's move on, compare that to the next model in the series, which is the A300. The AFF A300 is a similar chassis to the FAS 8200. They are 3U rack units. They've got 2 64-bit, 16-core, 1.7 gigahertz CPUs. That's per pair in the chassis, and 256 gig of RAM and 16 gig of NVRAM. Removing the front bezel from the A300, you can see that it does not have internal disks, so you need to use external disk shelves for the A300. It takes a maximum of 384 drives, and the maximum raw capacity per HA pair is 11,750 terabytes, around 11 petabytes. The interfaces on the A300, it's got 4 10 gigabit Ethernet RJ45 ports, 4 10 gigabit Ethernet SFP ports, which take transceivers, 8 times 10 gig Ethernet or 16 gig fiber channel UTA2 ports, 8 times 12 gig mini SAS ports, and it's got 4 times PCI Express 3 expansion slots. With the different chassis, some of them take PCI Express expansion slots, and some of them have got I/O module expansion slots. These are a different form factor. So whenever you're buying a card that's going to fit into one of the expansion slots, you need to make sure you get the correct type. It's going to be either one or the other. Looking at the back of the A300, so from left to right here, we can see we've got the 4 SAS ports for connections to our disk shelves. Then we've got a couple of 10 gigabit Ethernet ports. Then we have got the 4 UTA2 ports, then another couple of 10 gigabit Ethernet ports with RJ45 connectors this time. Then we've got the E0M management port for management over IP, over the network. And we've got the console port for plugging in directly for management, a USB port, and then those are our 2 expansion slots there. So this is one controller. If we looked at the back of the whole chassis, you would see there's one controller on top. There's going to be another controller, again, identical to this, underneath in the same chassis. Next model we've got is the A700. This is the big boy of the current range. Similar chassis to the FAS 9000. They're both the same size. That's 8U rack units. This is per HA pair, 4 times 64-bit, 18-core, 2.3 gigahertz CPU, and it's 1024 gig of RAM and 64 gig of NVRAM. Looking at the front again, no internal drives in the A700. It takes a maximum of 480 drives, 14,688 terabytes raw capacity in external shelves per HA pair. The interfaces on the A700, there's no onboard client or disk ports on the controller. It's got 20 I/O module expansion slots. So this is different than those PCI Express 3 slots. And UTA2 cards are not supported in the AFF A700. So looking at the picture of the back now, you can see there as the controllers here in the middle, which have got the onboard management ports on them, but they don't have any onboard Ethernet or fiber channel ports for connectivity to clients. They don't have onboard SAS ports for connectivity to disk shelves. So they get put into the expansion slots here on the left and on the right for the 2 controllers. Next one we've got is the AFF A700S. So we had the AFF A700, which is the big 8-rack units model. The AFF A700S, the S stands for slim, and it's a smaller version. The specs are quite similar, but it's smaller. So it's 4 U-rack units rather than 8. It's got the same CPUs in there, which is 4 times 64-bit, 18-core, 2.3 gigahertz. And it's 1024 gig of RAM, the same as the A700, a bit less than the NVRAM. It's 32 gig on the A700S. It does have internal drives. So if we take the front bezel off, you can see that you can fit 24 internal drives in there. When you add the expansion shelves as well, you can bump that up to a maximum of 216 drives per HA pair, which goes up to 6,609 terabytes of raw capacity. The interfaces on the A700S, it has got 8 times 40 gigabit Ethernet QSFP+. Those can be split into 16 times 10 gigabit Ethernet by using the correct splitter cable. It's got 8 times PCI Express expansion slots in there. UTA2 cards are not supported, and it doesn't have any onboard SAS ports, so you're going to need to buy those for connecting to external disk shelves if you want to do that. Looking at the back of the A700S, so this is a single controller again. The first slot here is taken up by the NVRAM, so the other 4 are what we've got available for expansion cards. We've got the 4 40 gigabit Ethernet connections down here in the bottom right. We've got our EOM for remote management over our IP network, and we've got the console port for the local management over a console cable. There's also a BMC port here as well, which again is used for remote management. It works a bit different though. I'll cover that in a later lecture. The next one to cover is the AFF A800. You can see the front of it here. It's 4 U-rack units, 2 times 64-bit, 24-core, 2.1 gigahertz CPU, 1280 gig of RAM, and 64 gig of NVRAM. The AFF A800 does support internal drives, and a difference with the A800 is it takes NVMe drives. Now, these are different than the drives that go into the SAS disk shelves, so you can't mix and match those. But the AFF A800 does take connections going down to external disk shelves as well, the same ones as the other AFF models, which do take those standard SAS type disks. So say that again, for the internal drives with a different type of drive, they are NVMe SSDs, and you can fit up to 48 of them in the A800. You can also add the external SAS disk shelves as well, which are standard, the same as on the other AFF models. And on them, you can add your SATA, your SAS, and your SSD drives. It's a different type than the NVMe. With the A800, this is the fastest performing out of the ONTAP product range. It's very fast, and you can get end-to-end NVMe with this. The interfaces on there, again, tying it in with being the top of the range and the highest performing model. This one has got 4 times 100 gigabit Ethernet. So that's not supported on the other models of our ONTAP platforms yet. It's got 10 PCI Express expansion slots and no onboard SAS ports, so you're going to need to add those if you want to have external disks. UTA2 cards are not supported. Another difference is that 32 gigabit fiber channel is supported on the AFF A800. On the other models, it's 16 gigabit fiber channel. And looking at the back, you can see the chassis here. So as usual, we've got the controller at the top and a controller at the bottom. We've got those 100 gigabit Ethernet ports in there and the 4 expansion slots and our usual management ports on the back of the controller. The A800 is aimed at large enterprises. When ONTAP 9.6 came out, NetApp also released a new mid-range model, which also provides end-to-end NVMe. That's the AFF A320. The size is 2U. It has 4 times 64-bit, 10-core, 2.2 gigahertz CPU, and 512 gig of RAM, and 32 gig of NVRAM. Looking at it with the front bezel removed, you can see that the A320 does not have any internal drives. So it uses external drives, and as I said, it does support end-to-end NVMe. So as well as the new platform coming out with ONTAP 9.6, at the same time, also external NVMe disk shelves were released as well, which are supported with the A320. So the A320 does not have any internal drives, and it supports only the external NVMe disk shelves. The A800, on the other hand, does have internal NVMe drives, and it also supports the external SAS shelves. The interfaces on the A320, it has 16 times 100 gigabit QSFP28 Ethernet ports. So just like the A800, the A320 also has onboard 100 gigabit Ethernet. Those ports are used for the cluster interconnect, the client connections, and the disk shelf connections. The A320 does not have onboard SAS ports because it does not support external SAS disk shelves. The way that you connect to those new NVMe disk shelves is also with Ethernet, with RoCE over Ethernet. I'll talk more about the NVMe disk shelves when we get to the disk shelf lecture later in this section. It also has 4 times PCIe 3 expansion slots. UTA2 cards are not supported, but 32 gigabit fiber channel cards are supported, and you can also add Ethernet cards to those expansion slots as well, including 100 gigabit Ethernet cards with RoCE support for connecting to additional external disk shelves. Looking at the back of the A320, you can see there are the 800 gigabit Ethernet ports on each controller. We've got a controller at the top and a controller at the bottom, and we've got the management ports over on the right there. As well as the A320, another entry-level platform was also released when ONTAP 9.6 came out. So the A320 is mid-range. There's also the C190, which is an entry-level platform, which was released at the same time. This has the same chassis as the AFF A220, so it is 2U rack units, but the difference between this and the A220 is this has less processing power. It's got 2 times 64-bit 8-core, 1.5 gigahertz CPU, 64 gig of RAM, and 8 gig of NVRAM. Because it has the same chassis, it also has a maximum of 24 internal drives. It supports up to 23 terabytes of raw capacity. When you order it, you can order it with either 8, 12, 18, or 24 960 gigabyte SSD drives. And with the C920, the capacity cannot be expanded beyond that. So you can add additional controllers to your cluster, but the C190 does not take any additional external disks. It only supports the internal drives. The interfaces are 8x10 gigabit Ethernet or UTA2 ports, 4x10 gigabit Ethernet SFP Plus in addition to that, and it also has 4 SAS ports, although they can't actually be used. It just uses the internal disks. It has those because it shares the same chassis as the AFF A220, and it has no expansion slots. So looking at the back of the AFF C190, it is exactly the same as the AFF A220, which you saw earlier. Thanks for watching. If you want to get hands-on practice with NetApp storage for free on your laptop, then you can download my free ebook, which you can see above my head right now. Also check out my NetApp Storage Complete course, which will teach you everything you could possibly want to know about ONTAP. Thanks.